Welcome everyone to the latest Fluence webinar, the Fireside chat discussing vertical farming and urban applications with Farm.one. I'm Jennifer Bassick, Director of Business Development at Fluence. I'm going to introduce the panelists in a moment, but first I'd like to go over a little housekeeping. The agenda today is to hear briefly from our panelists, followed by a Q&A session hosted by Elise Greenberg, Fluence's Director of Marketing and Communications. We highly encourage you to ask your questions using the Q&A button below. The webinar is being recorded and will be available to you on Friday. A link will be emailed to you to share with your colleagues. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Rob Laing is the CEO and founder of Farm.one, a radical new kind of farm in the heart of one of the busiest cities in the world. Started in New York in 2016, Farm.one is a vertical farm that grows rare and exotic produce indoors, year-round, and pesticide-free using hydroponics and LED lighting. Rob and I originally connected when I was looking to turn my passion for urban farming into a career. I was fascinated by his story, jumped at the opportunity to meet him, and since then have spent significant time at Farm.one. Knowing that I had a tech background, Rob walked me through the technology he uses to power the farm and mentioned that he was impressed with the innovative nature of his main LED lighting supplier. He suggested a conversation with them could be a great way for me to segue into the industry. Long story short, I took him up on his offer for an introduction, and here I am at Fluence today. As you will soon hear, Rob is an experienced startup founder who is passionate about plant-based eating and using technology for clean, accessible food. He is the author of Ditch the Dirt, a home grower's guide to hydroponics and specialty produce. It's a beautifully detailed book that ties Rob's exquisite design sense to the herbs grown at Farm.one. It's available at Amazon if you'd like to buy it. In today's panel, Rob will provide his perspective on vertical farming applications in urban environments, the changing minds of the consumer, and where he sees the future of vertical farming evolving. Our other panelist, Dr. Abhay Thosor, is the Director of Horticulture Services here at Fluence. Dr. Thosor runs a program of growers who consult with other growers on their cultivation strategy. It is the goal of the program to equip growers with the right tools as they implement LED technology in their farms. Abhay's motivation to start a career in agriculture was fueled by a conversation he had with his father at an early age. His father explained to him that a farmer is a very important person in society. The farmer works in the fields to provide food, not only to his own family, but to the whole of society. That story was life-changing for Dr. Thosor and drove his decision to pursue a career in agriculture. During his PhD studies, he had decided that rather than sitting in his office doing research and writing papers, he wanted to be out in the field researching the practical and commercial environment. His research focused on the challenges associated with the balance of the day-to-day operations for commercial growers with optimization of their productivity. Over the last 19 years, he gained valuable experience working across numerous crops in controlled environment agriculture. He has worked with ornamental crops, leafy greens, herbs, lettuce, berry crops, high wire crops, and nursery crops. And in the last 7 years, working with LED technology and recipe developments, not just for lighting applications, but working closely with growers on fine-tuning the environmental conditions to optimize the productivity for commercial controlled environment operations. He is a continuous learner with each and every application of LEDs, since no two greenhouses are the same. Now it's my pleasure to turn the session over to Rob, who will begin the short presentation section of this webinar.
Hey Jen, thanks for having me today. I'd like to talk a little bit about Farm.one before we get started. And so, as you can see from the image here, Farm.one is all about people really, and it's a vertical farm. And our main facility is in New York. We're in an area of Manhattan called Tribeca, which is, if you know Manhattan, it's one of the sort of fanciest, most exclusive zip codes. But it doesn't mean you can't have a farm there. And so our farm, and the image you see there, is based in a basement. We're actually underneath a 2 Michelin star restaurant there. And we share a building with a vet, a dog swimming pool, an eye hospital. So it's kind of really New York City. Everything's crowded in together. And the image behind me is actually one of our other rooms on the farm that a lot of people don't get to see, where you can see we've got some really tight spaced vertical farming setups there. And the kind of crops that you can see us growing there, Ina, our tour guide and project manager, she's lifting up a raft of some yarrow flowers. We got some dianthus in front of that, and all kinds of crops you can see behind me as well. And we grow a huge range of products for chefs, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute, but we've tried to build a farm that can handle all these diverse different sets of products. And if we go to the next slide, you can see some more examples of how we work. So that's Johnny there planting seeds in rockwool cubes. That's one of the many sort of growing medias that we use. You've got some tour guests on the right-hand side who are enjoying a tour of the farm, which is another thing that we do. You can see a little bit of Fluence lighting at the top there, so really happy to work with Fluence on that. And then down in the bottom right, you can see an example of our technology. So we develop software to run the farm and to manage all these hundreds of different crops at one time. And we're constantly trying to improve that and build systems that allow us to work in such a small space with so many different products going on. And on the next slide, you can see some examples of those. And so we grow all kinds of edible flowers, rare herbs, and microgreens. On the right-hand side, you can see a dish from 11 Madison Park, a pretty well-known restaurant that uses some of our product. And you can see some Nepetella flowers on there. And those flowers are really, really pungent, minty in aroma, but really small and delicate. And that's like a perfect example of a product from us. It's got a lot of flavor to it, but it's not a very big product. And it's certainly not like a salad green or one of the more conventional crops you might find on a vertical farm. So at any one time, our farm might be growing up to 100 different things. We like those things to, to look perfect. They've got to be a perfect size for a chef. They've got to be a perfect shape. And yeah, that relationship with chefs is something that's really important to us. So if you go to the next slide, one of the most important things we do in New York City is we work with about 40 different restaurants, and we bring them product on a grow to order basis. Because we're so close, we can deliver everything ourselves. We can use reusable packaging so that we can reduce packaging waste as well. But obviously, in the past couple of months, that's become incredibly difficult. So most of our customers have shut down. A lot of those guys are not going to return, unfortunately. So as a business, we've really had to pivot and try new things. And the first sort of most obvious thing was to sell to consumers, which is what we're doing now. And so you can see here on the left is our new website. Actually, this image isn't even published yet, but you can see on our website, if you visit Farm.one, you can now buy product directly from us. We do contactless delivery and contactless pickup from Tribeca. And we offer a sort of limited range of what we offer to chefs. And we're getting some really good responses. So I'm really happy to say that we've got lots of happy customers now, lots of repeat customers who are now integrating these microgreens, these herbs, these edible flowers, and also all kinds of experiences that are a little bit like having a tour of the farm, but in your own home. So it's been a really tough time for us. And, I'm sure we'll talk about that in a second. But, the team's been really creative. And I think having this sort of broad range of product and really interesting product has allowed us to do some really good things during this challenging time. So I'll pass it on to Abhay now, who will tell you more about Fluence.
Hey, thanks, Rob. Thanks, Jen, for such a nice introduction. And good afternoon to all our attendees, and also maybe good evening, because we might have attendees from Europe or even from Asia, as a matter of fact. So just as Jen mentioned, hello everyone. My name is Abhay Tosar, and I work as the Director of Horticulture Services with the Fluence. And I lead a team of individuals or personnel who are not just technically qualified, but they are also having experience in commercial greenhouses, and that encompasses our team of horticulture specialists. And the reason for that is the technical understanding of horticulture concepts, as well as the practicality of applications in the commercial greenhouse. That's where I think our team is unique, because you can bring both the good of both worlds, I would say, or the best of the both worlds. So our team works with commercial growers in transition from conventional lighting. And when I say conventional lighting, it's typically high pressure sodium, which we all are so much familiar with, to the LED lighting. And it could be either supplemental lighting in the greenhouses, or it could be sole source lighting in a warehouse or a room. And as we see that for today's discussion, when it comes to the controlled environment agriculture, I will be focusing more on work in sole source lighting or vertical farming, so to speak. Can we go to the next slide, please? So Fluence is a manufacturer of LED horticulture lighting. However, I want to really let all of you know, all our viewers understand that we don't just sell a hardware or a lighting fixture, because that's not what Fluence does in the market. It is essential that for you to understand, we offer a holistic solution. And when I say holistic solution, it is more important that where our team, Fluence team, whether it is the sales team, whether it is the horticulture service team, we try to understand and work with the grower with the current crop production, what is the objective of the grower, understanding the current lighting scenario, and then discussing the optimized lighting conditions. But it is not only limited to lighting at that point, but we also work very closely with the grower, and this comes post-sales, which not many companies do that. And we offer most of our support, which comes post-sales, because LED, one of the things is it's a new technology, and there are a lot of questions that growers have, and what I call as the fear of the unknown. And that's exactly where our team comes in, and we work with the grower. We hold the hands, and we give our support system that they can tap into. So as you can see on the slide here, we help the world grow smarter. So what that means is we work closely with the grower in reducing the energy consumption, as you can see there, as well as optimizing the inputs, which is very important to increase the productivity per square meter. At the same time, when we see reduced water, now this is more in conjunction with vertical farming or sole source farming, as well as the quality enhancement of the product. And this is where the lighting perspective comes into play, because it's not just the intensity, but it is also important how the spectrum plays an important role if you want to achieve a certain quality of the product. Can we go to the next slide, please? So talking about vertical farming, I know it's not entirely a new concept of growing, I would say. We have been doing vertical farming knowingly or unknowingly, I would say, and plants have been grown in a vertical setup. However, the limitation was the lighting, and lighting being the limitation until last few years. What we were using in the labs, and my background also is in plant tissue culture, and I absolutely used fluorescent tubes because that was the only thing that was available when I was doing my research. So as we see through these years, that has evolved, and with the technology evolved, and now the LED fixtures are a lot more affordable. And I would say, and that's the reason that the farm to table concept, and I like this very much because as Jen said, I was influenced by my dad saying that the farmer is an important person. So the farm to table concept, that has evolved, and that is going to evolve going forward, where we are talking about these vertical farms. And over the past few years, we have seen so much interest in the vertical farms that farm to table is now almost getting into my basement to my table, I should say, if the people are already doing it. If not, it might be you're going to the grocery store and you might be picking the produce, right, like a live lettuce or a live herb that you would pick and bring it to your table in a matter of like maybe an hour's drive or half an hour or 15 minutes, how far you are from the grocery store. So that's how it has been evolving. And that is also important, because nowadays we get these scares of E. coli from the field-grown produce. That's one of the things, but also important is the shifting consumer trends. The consumers, most of the millennials, even I would like to get a locally produced food. The reason for that is, if I know that there is no insecticide or pesticide sprayed on that product, definitely I don't care whether it is organic or not, but I definitely want it to be chemical free. So that's also one of the trends that we see nowadays. Can we go to the next slide, please? So when we talk about the technology advancements, I think lighting is definitely the key. And that has been, like lighting has been the last frontier, I would say, because until now, yeah, we were using high pressure sodium lights, but to be honest, those lights were researched and developed for human beings, for applications where human beings could see things clearly, whether it was a parking lot, whether it is a stadium. So that's the reason that light was developed and researched. However, the growers are smart and they brought that light in the greenhouse. But now, lighting is not the limitation anymore. And that's the reason now it has become the key. Especially for the vertical farming, we know that it takes up anywhere between 30 to 40% of the capex as well as the opex in the vertical farming. And the grower would be looking for an efficient as well as cost-effective lighting solution. So with the developments in the LED technology, we can definitely now offer these solutions. So compared to the fluorescent tubes, I would say, or other traditional sources, we can deploy the LEDs in a targeted space in a very close proximity. And just today in the morning, I was discussing with one of our colleagues. We want to go as close as less than 6 inches above the plant canopy. So that's just changing the whole dynamics of lighting applications. Now, depending on the crop as well as the market or customer preference, it's possible to use the qualitative aspect of the light, and that's what I would call as the spectrum to steer the plant performance and to achieve any particular objective. So this is just in a broad scope of things that I just wanted to explain about Fluence lighting, how lighting is now affordable as well as efficient, and how Fluence can actually work with our growers to make this a reality. Thank you.
Thank you both. All right, Rob, if you will join us for this panel Q&A session. Thank you. All right, hi everyone, my name is Elise. I am the Director of Marketing Communications here at Fluence, and I'm just gonna moderate this section of the presentation. So I encourage you to please locate your Q&A button and ask those questions. And before we dive into some of the technical details and aspects about vertical farming, Rob, I'd like to just start with you and talk a little bit about today's environment. You're uniquely situated in New York City. And so I'm wondering, can you talk about how you've seen behavioral changes? I know you talked about in your presentation, but how have you pivoted your model? And for people who are maybe interested in starting a vertical farm or currently operating a vertical farm, what creative ways they can pivot?
Sure, yeah, so we're kind of uniquely affected in that we have one source of revenue, which is chef sales, and another source, which is events. And so both of those got almost completely wiped out. And really, it's been a very sad time for us because we talked to chefs who've had to lay off their whole team, and they don't know if they're going to be able to bring their restaurants back to life. But at the same time, I think it's really, spoke to the local aspect of what we're doing, in that like our farm is right there in the city. It's not some kind of distant phenomenon. And it's something that people love to engage with. They love the idea of having a farm in their community. And so, we've been able to set up this local delivery and local pickup of our produce. And we've tweaked our product range, so we're not selling as many different types of products as before, and we're not selling some of the really weird and unusual stuff that only chefs really know how to use. We're definitely growing a slightly more accessible range of products, but it's something where, as a team and as a small team, we're kind of used to adapting really quickly anyway. That's what small businesses have to do. And so, it wasn't really that unusual for us to sort of like just get together or virtually get together and try to figure out like, how are we going to do this thing? How are we going to sell? How do we, set up the online store? How do we do the logistics of like, running the farm? And so normally on our farm, at any given day running the farm, there might be like 5 up to like 10 different people there, and in a very tight space. And we knew that we couldn't, continue to do that. So we set up instead these kind of staggered shifts where a maximum of 2 people would be on the farm at any one time. We really tried to limit, people coming in or people co-workers like coming into contact with each other. And that's gone pretty well. And I would say we've definitely like learned from that as well, how to stagger shifts and how to make the most out of the time on the farm. But still, you know, again, we're still figuring that stuff out. And in addition, what we're doing is we're, you know, trying to create as much virtual content as possible. And so you might have seen on our Instagram, we've got like, we invited like a couple of musicians to come in, again, like socially distanced, only one person was filming and they were far away, and they're actually recording music on the farm. I've personally done a lot of kind of video explanations of our product. We've got our bartender who came in and did a bunch of cocktail classes and stuff. And really we're able to do that and kind of make that stuff work because we spent so much time trying to build up a brand that people respect and, you know, engage with. And it's really sort of speaking to what everyone has already talked about in terms of this like farm to table movement, or basement to table even. And, you know, making farms more accessible, more transparent, more part of everyday life for people. And that's, you know, that's one of the things I love about vertical farming, is that you can now sort of put farms anywhere. And so we should, you know, put farms in places where they're more accessible to people, more transparent. And so if anything's come out of COVID that's positive, it's, you know, our team being able to do that stuff. And I think an encouragement of all farms around the country doing, you know, similar innovative things. I was watching Dan Barber and some of his, you know, sort of colleagues and other farmers as well around the US who were talking about, you know, them setting up new CSAs, them setting up new ways of getting product to people, and just lots of exciting innovation. So really tough time, but, you know, a time for a lot of creativity. And certainly I hope that we come through this with additional revenue streams, additional ways of selling, and some more knowledge about, you know, how to run a farm.
Great, that makes sense. And congratulations on your innovation there to adapt. All right, so let's dive into the details about vertical farming. We've got a lot of questions around setup and nutrients, and it varies. And so for the audience, I'm going to start this conversation about lighting, and then let's move into facility design. And so that's how you kind of expect your answers or your questions to be answered. And so Abhay, let's start with you. You've extensive experience in vertical farming. And so you mentioned in your presentation that there's been a dramatic change, particularly in technology in the market. And so can you talk specifically about vertical farming technology that you've seen and the evolution there?
Absolutely. Yeah. So as I was saying earlier during my introduction, until now we were looking at a lot of the fluorescent tubes, especially that were being used in vertical farming, so to speak. That's one thing, and not only just from the lighting, from the efficiency standpoint, where, you know, the number of micromoles, or how many moles do I get, and how many fluorescent tubes do I need in order to achieve that. That's one thing, because they were not as efficient. At the same time, again, as I said, those fluorescent tubes were developed for human eyes and not for the plant eyes. That's how I like to put it. So it's like the human eye versus the plant eye. So if I have something that is good for the human eye, I certainly don't know whether it is optimizing the plant performance or not. And that's exactly where the evolution came in. Like we have seen in the past 10 years now, you know, even the LEDs for application in vertical farming have evolved so much, like the efficiency standpoint, or even from the spectrum standpoint, you know, the ease of application standpoint. All of that has evolved so much. And that's where the importance comes in, is now people can target. Like I know Rob, he's already nodding there. He knows that, yeah, that's absolutely right, because he can now apply the desired micromole levels that he needs for the crop. And he doesn't have to pay exorbitant, you know, pricing, because now the efficiency of the modules is much better. But at the same time, now he also can be rest assured that I can buy the LEDs, you know, depending on the crop and what kind of spectrum does my crop need to achieve a specific objective. As he rightly said, he's working on so many different types of crops that he needs to focus on that. So that's exactly where, you know, the technology development as well as the research that the lighting companies like us, Fluence is doing. That's where we can bring value to the growers.
We have some questions from the audience here. Why are LED lights or why are grow lights in general that we've seen on the market so expensive? Can you talk a little bit about the history and where we're going with that?
You mean the LED lights being expensive?
Correct.
Okay, well, I have again, I like to just keep it simple, and sometimes, you know, I like to give an analogy for that. So if I have to buy a brand new Nissan Versa in the market, I can probably buy it for less than $20,000. And right now they can even come and deliver that for me. But if I have to buy a Tesla, well, it's going to cost me at least $50,000-$60,000. So, you know what I mean? Like, do I want to have a Nissan Versa or do I want to have a Tesla? I can still buy the fluorescent tubes for cheap, you know, but does it satisfy the need for my plant? Definitely not. But then when we are talking about the technology, the LEDs, you know, the driver, how we are getting a higher efficiency from those modules, I think that's where it also, it's getting slightly expensive than compared to the fluorescent tubes. But see,
Okay.
that's exactly where we shouldn't be comparing, because I see that that's an unfair comparison, just as I compared a Nissan Sentra with Tesla.
Okay, that makes sense.
Nothing against both of those cars. I'm not saying.
Yeah, sounds good. And so, Rob, as you were designing and setting up your farm, of course, lighting was one of the key contributors because you're working indoors, you're sole source. So what are some of the factors as you were planning that you were looking for in this technology?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. You know, at the very beginning, we were really curious about performance, and we had, you know, I came from no background, right? I had no idea. So, you know, we wanted to just find out, would crops grow? Would they taste good? You know, it's a really basic question, but like, if I grow something in hydroponics with LED lights, is it going to taste as good as outdoors? And so actually in our first farm, we had the opportunity to test some older LEDs. We had some fluorescents. We also had some newer LEDs from a variety of manufacturers. And so we were able to figure that out. And, you know, certainly discovering about, you know, the age of crops and their need for light and, you know, bigger flowering crops and, you know, being very power hungry or light hungry, so to speak. So we discovered a lot from that. But also, like, you know, we had this interesting experience. And funnily enough, in the room behind me in this image, that room actually used to have an older indoor farm in it, where someone was using high pressure sodium lamps. And, you know, each one of those lamps that we removed in order to put in LEDs was about a 1 kilowatt lamp, you know? And so it was pretty obvious if you turn one of those things on, just the pure amount of heat coming off that in a small space was, you know, unmanageable. And so, you know, one of the really just basic things about setting up an indoor farm is if you're using LEDs and if you're using quite low profile ones, like a lot of the Fluence products, you're able to stack things really tight. If you see behind me, there's about a 12-inch spacing between these levels. And you're not giving off a lot of heat, so you've got less heat to manage. They're not sort of, you know, sucking up huge amounts of power, so we can run the thing more economically. So there's some really sort of just basic stuff like that that makes LEDs in general more attractive. And, you know, when you're running the farm as well, like, I'll tell you, like, replacing equipment, it's a nightmare. You don't want to do it unless you really have to. So you better find a light that's going to last for thousands and thousands of hours without needing replacement. And you better find a manufacturer that can offer a product that's going to be reliable, because if you're installing, you know, 500 of these things and there's a 1% failure rate, that's actually pretty high, you know? So you want to do something where you can work with people who produce a reliable product.
Great, thanks. Yeah, could you imagine working in downtown New York in that basement with those high pressure sodium lights above you? Not a great work environment there. Okay, so let's shift from lighting over to your actual farm and kind of the other aspects that go into your vertical farming setup. And so one of the things that, Abhay, I want to ask you first is, when people are thinking about doing a vertical farm design and looking at that facility design, can you identify like the top 3 considerations that will drive the direction of that facility design. So we just touched on lighting. What are some of the other topics that they need to define first before we move forward to design?
Yep, absolutely. So the first one would be the crop choice. What type of crops you want to grow? What is the objective that you want to achieve by growing those crops? So different crops, as we know, as Rob just said, they need different, heights, different, the growth habits of the crop. So I would say number one is the crop. Number two is your customers. Whom are you going to sell it to? And number three is, are you able to have automation in there? Because that is also important component for vertical farming. So with these three things in mind, I think that's where I would start if I had to do a vertical farm.
Thank you. And so Rob, taking those aspects, we have a few people asking, we see that you grow a ton of different crops in your farm throughout the year. And so how do you manage your lighting and your photo period controls for those different crops in such a dense environment?
Yeah, initially we thought that we might need like 5 different rooms with like, completely different temperatures, and we might need a completely different setup for many of these crops. Luckily, we're able to put stuff into zones really. And so we have, I would say, maybe 4 or 5 different nutrient zones on the farm that are supplying either a different nutrient mix or even just a different pH with actually the same nutrient mix. And we can find that, for instance, plants like violas, those simple little flowers that seem to be like the same species but different colors, that actually have really different requirements sometimes in terms of pH. And, a lot of people will know this on the call, but pH levels within nutrients, a lot of it's about the plant's ability to uptake certain nutrients at different pHs. And so you can have the same mix of nutrients, but at a different pH, maybe the iron is more available or phosphorus is more available. So some of those plants look like they're the same, but actually they need a very different environment. Whereas others, can thrive right next to each other under the same conditions as well. So, the other thing that we've found, and this is partly because we're a small company, and so the farms that we have built are not perfect. They're more like hand-built than something that's kind of manufactured out of a production line. But what we've also found as well is, like, in these rooms that we have that are not perfect shapes and sizes, and the ceilings are different heights and things, we'll find that actually, because our air circulation is not necessarily perfect, maybe one rack will have like a higher temperature than another one, not on purpose, but it just happened that way. So we'll know, okay, we're growing nasturtiums, we'll put them on there, or we're growing some mini onions, we'll put them over here. And so we try to then sort of feed that back into our software so that the software knows, okay, rack A2 level 6 is like a slightly different temperature, or it's like it's slightly different other kind of environment. And then of course we've got lots of different heights as well for our lighting. And so a lot of people know this on the call as well, but if you have a fixed power of light that's 1 foot away versus 2 foot away, the 2 foot away will have 1/4 of the actual light intensity hitting that canopy down the bottom there. So you can do things with spacing instead of having to sort of mess around too much with other things in your lighting setup. And so through a combination of those things, we probably got dozens and dozens of different configurations that we can have. But I would say the good thing is, you don't need to have like everything completely different for each plant.
Okay. And I see, so there are a lot of different questions I'm getting now from people with that response. And so I'll try to break it up into 3 things: standardization, light levels, and HVAC nutrient control. So Abhay, could you speak towards, we see in Rob's farm that he's broken it up into zones, and there really isn't a standard because ceiling heights change and all these sort of things. But some growers are asking, is there a standard or best practice for vertical farming out there in the market? Are there things that you should purchase because it's out there and fit for vertical farming applications?
Like from the structure aspect?
So,
well, again, as I said, and Rob already mentioned that in what he said earlier, it will be depending on, what size is your warehouse, So that's where it all starts. But if you're building something new, like from ground up, well, then you can definitely have, that, okay, this is the section where I'm going to have a certain crop. You can divide it into sections. You can have different environmental controls for all of that. But if you're building into a set building that you already have, yeah, that will definitely drive how you're going to do the setup. But that being said, it can still be, as Rob said, we can compartmentalize, and we can have different crops in different compartments.
Okay. And Rob, we're getting some questions about how do you manage different light levels in your farm with your different crops? And so do you have kind of a baseline light level PPFD at your canopy that you deploy all around, or are you breaking that up in zones as well?
Yeah, I mean, Abhay is probably better to talk about specific PPFD numbers, because on a day-to-day basis, I don't sort of look at those numbers. But I'll give you like a really basic example, which I think would hopefully illustrate this for most people. And so if you look behind me on these racks, we're using either the original Razor X product, or on some of those behind, we have a Razor 3. Which, if you're not familiar with the product, it has these 3 bars to it. Each bar consumes, I'm probably slightly off, but around 30 watts. And so across that 2 foot by 4 foot area, you're using about 90 watts of power to create that light level. And of course, the further away the product is from the light, the less, actual effective light is going to hit that. And so, and that's how you sort of put some of these PPFD numbers in perspective. What we found is that for some, for microgreens where we're growing a microgreen, which is not really a cress, it's actually like more of a full size or a baby leaf in a way, where if you've got like a Mizuna, you're going to have a leaf that's maybe a couple of inches in length. It's going to have that characteristic mature leaf kind of shape. For those kind of products where it's a little bit of a larger leaf, that Razor 3 product is working really well for us, because it's a slightly more intensity than a lot of people would be growing their microgreens for. But we want that larger leaf. We want a bit more flavor. We want a more of a robust plant that actually is a little bit sort of slightly stressed by the amount of light, like it's, but it's uptaking more nutrients, it's kind of growing, and it's really robust as a plant. Whereas if we're growing something a little bit younger, a little bit more delicate, we've got a product that we grow called Dragon's Tongue arugula, which is something that thrives a lot more on like a lower light level. And so that we might, in the same space, we might use the Razor 2, which has 2 bars instead of 3. So you're getting, 1/3 less light there. So that's maybe a simple way to illustrate it. But in terms of like the precise numbers, probably Abhay is going to be way better than me, I think. Okay.
Abhay, can you kind of use maybe 3 crops that you see commonly in vertical farms and identify what those PPFD levels would be?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I can do that. But before that, I would just continue on what Rob was saying. So yeah, no, you are absolutely spot on, Rob, that different crops do need different light levels. And so I think that's where the concept of dynamic lighting comes into play, where, Fluence has the Fluence lights have the ability where you can actually dim them as per the requirement of the crop. So I think that's exactly what I was saying earlier, that with the evolving technology, it's not just the lighting of the spectrum now, we call it more as a dynamic lighting. So it's not lighting anymore. The word has changed. It's dynamic lighting. So that's that part. And then coming back to what you asked me, Elise. So I'll just say for example, if it's lettuce. So if I'm growing lettuce in a vertical farm, depending on, like, say, I want to harvest a lettuce, which is approximately, say, 130 grams head that I want to harvest, I'm looking at anywhere around 17 to 18 moles per day. I'm not sure if our audience knows about moles per day, but then you can easily translate that into how many micromoles you would need, and that would be approximately anywhere between 200 to 250 micromoles, and running the lights for 16 to 18 hours per day. So then you can get closer to the number where it is like 14 to 15 moles per day. So that's how I would do the calculation. So if it is say basil, I would go a little bit higher, like 300 or 350 micromoles, and run it for 18 hours a day. So now we are getting like 16 to 18 moles per day. So that's the way. Yeah, sorry.
I was going to say that really brings us back to, as a grower, for you guys to identify your crops that you're going to be offering to your customers early on, so that you can work with your lighting provider to identify those ideal light levels and, you know, receive a lighting design so that
Yep.
you can see exactly what light levels you'll get within your facility.
Absolutely. So that's exactly, you know, where, so the young plants, what Rob was talking about. So right after germination, if I'm growing like the microgreens, sure enough, I don't need to target really high micromoles for that, because they can still respond to anywhere up to 180 to 200 micromoles. If I still get like 12 moles per day, it's fine. And that's exactly where the dynamic lighting concept comes into play. So I can still have them grow underneath the lights. I can dim the lights that they can get only 12 moles. And then if I change my mind, like, okay, next round I'm going to grow lettuce underneath, sure, I can crank it up and I can still grow lettuce with the same setup. So that's the flexibility that the growers can have.
That makes sense. Okay, so let's move into a little bit of other aspects of your farm, Rob. And so just to end us on lighting, we have some questions about how do you control your lighting in your farm. So let's move into control section. So do you have a way to control your lights in your farm?
Yeah, sure. I would say, you know, a lot of the lights that we have bought, you know, have been in the past few years, and some of those before this, like dynamic lighting that Abhay was talking about. And so I think that if we were going to build a new facility now, we would definitely use more of that dynamic lighting technology. That's pretty attractive for us. Most of the other lighting we have is on either simple timers, like literally the ones that you like turn and have the little, you know, clock face thing on them, or they're on smart plugs, which are kind of controlled centrally by like a little dashboard that we have. But it's nothing like sort of crazy complex that, you know, anyone without some, you know, reasonable technical know-how could do. It's pretty straightforward. But yeah, generally for most of our crops, we're using like an 18-hour light on and then 6 hours off cycle. Yeah.
Okay. Great. And so let's talk about HVAC. So vertical farming is pretty unique. You want to avoid those microclimates. So how do you control airflow within your farm?
Yeah, you know, we're in the sort of most difficult situation because literally our building was built in 1865, right? And it was definitely not built with vertical farming in mind. And, you know, we're in a tricky situation where the condenser, which is the outside unit for the HVAC, is like a long way away from the actual farm room. So we have a lot of loss in between those lines. So it's sort of like the worst setup you could get. But I think what we did was we kind of upgraded that system. We had to do a bit of, you know, certainly for us when we're building new projects now, it's a lot easier. We can work with an engineering firm that has just done a lot of these things, you know, so there's a few firms out there who've done more vertical farms. So we can work with them, with their expertise. When we were setting up our farm, really, you know, I think before you go into this, if you come from slightly older world where the lights are producing a lot of heat, you think that the work of the HVAC is going to be about extracting heat from the space, but actually, you know, with modern efficient lights, you know, they're not really kicking off that much heat. And so a lot of it's about actually removing humidity from the room. And so you might find that a lot of HVAC units for vertical farming now are kind of over-spec'd on the humidity reduction rather than, you know, simple heat. And so I'd really recommend that, you know, and there's something probably people can do through Fluence as well, but if you're doing a project of like over 1,000 square feet or something, you know, I would definitely work with a firm or some people who've kind of done this before, because your regular HVAC person is just not going to quite have the experience to deal with, you know, the transpiration from the plants, the evaporation, just all this, the requirements for airflow and all that kind of stuff.
Makes sense. And Abhay, if a grower is used to growing on a single tier and they're thinking about going vertically, in addition to really evaluating your HVAC needs, what other environmental conditions will they need to take into consideration? I'm thinking CO2 or things like that.
Yep, you already said that. Yep, CO2, also temperature, because if they're going, you know, multi-tier, like 7, 8, or even 10, you know, levels, you want to make sure that you don't have a temperature delta between the topmost tier and the lowermost tier. That is also very important. At the same time, you know, with what Rob was saying, because of the proper air movement, you can also use the CO2 with the same efficacy, I would say, where it is constantly moving in between the layers. So that is also important. A very important thing would be humidity, which Rob already mentioned, because that sometimes people don't pay attention to that, but that is a really important parameter that the growers need to understand, because temperature, humidity, lighting, CO2, all of these, they go hand in hand, because it comes down to, it's not that you just push the accelerator, but there are so many components that you just change the lighting, but now it's the CO2, your temperature, your humidity, all of that is going to be affected. So as you go in a multi-tier, these are some of the environmental parameters that the growers do need to make sure that they stay on top of it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'd just say one other thing, which is about airflow, and you'll find with a lot of microgreens, if you just don't, it's really basic, but if you don't have sufficient airflow, the likelihood of mold is going to go up,
Yep.
substantially. So just another reason to make sure that's right.
We have some questions here, Rob, about how you claim to be pesticide free. So how do you manage that in a farm that has so many layers and so many different crops?
Sure. So I think there's a few sort of levels of biosecurity that you could have. And, if you're operating a huge facility like a Bowery, Aerofarms Plenty, that kind of thing, you're going to devote quite a lot of space to biosecurity, and people going in and out are going to have to go through, quite really stringent protocols that are closer to like a semiconductor facility than, a traditional farm. We're kind of somewhere in the middle with that, where when we built out our facility and when we design new ones, we've got to balance this aspect of, we want visitors, we like sharing the farm, we like people to go in there, we want them to be able to see stuff. And so we can't have like a multi-airlock kind of system, which is, completely sealed off. But what we do try to do is we try to stop things from coming in the farm that may have pests on them. And the list is pretty easy to figure out. It's like people, there's packaging, there's growing media, and any other sort of product that's coming into the farm. For instance, like it's something that you don't think about until you run a farm, but like cardboard boxes, like a great place for pests to live, or growing media if it's not sanitized or if it's not a sterile product, great place for pests to live. And so, we do a basic step of getting, all our staff obviously are changing into new clothes, hairnets, hats, all that kind of stuff. When visitors come in, they're wearing jackets, they're wearing hair coverings, but, it's not perfect, right? And so what does happen is, pests do come in. And I think, I'm trying to think of the first pests we would have had, probably just thrips, which if you've never heard of thrips, tiny, annoying little bugs that don't really affect the crops too much, but you don't want them on there on the product going out to the customer. They can create like dark spots, they can affect the flavor of plants and stuff, so you definitely don't want them, right? So it's probably most useful for people who are just thinking of starting a farm. When you have a very, very small facility or like a couple of racks, you probably won't even really get pests, and you'll think pest management is like really easy, but the sort of the larger the farm, it's almost like this exponential level of risk where, twice the size of farm, you're kind of 4 times more likely to get pests. And so you have to sort of discover really quickly, like, what are you going to do? And I think those decisions you make very early on as a business really inform, the future in a way that you didn't really predict. Because if you go down the route of using, off-the-counter chemical pesticides, that kind of stuff, you'll probably get a really sort of good result, like the pests will die. But that's kind of it from then on. Like, you'll probably never go back to a more difficult method, which is what we use, which in general is called integrated pest management. Our approach really is that prevention step, trying to stop things coming in. And then once, if like it is kind of when basically pests will arrive, we're going to use beneficial insects. And so we work with a couple of people to supply us with the correct insects to ideally eat the things or, stop the reproduction of the things that are causing, disruption on the farm. And that for us, it's something that takes a lot of work. You've got to it's sort of like steering an oil tanker. You can't like wait for things just to become a big problem and expect to fix them. You've got to have a continuous protocol. You've got to be ordering the right things at the right time. When you have beneficials coming in, you often have to distribute them like that day. Otherwise, these things are going to die. And you're not going to get the value out of them. And you've got to be, you just got to be really, really kind of alert. So the whole team always has to know, okay, this is how I spot a pest. This is what we do. And you have to have a really good relationship with your supplier there so that you make sure you're getting fresh product and you're getting it when you need it. So it's certainly something that, as a business, we're pretty good at it now. We're kind of on top of it, but it took a while, and it takes, an organizational culture where people are going to be prepared to, keep doing it. It's a little bit like the social distancing we have now, with COVID-19. It's like, if I go out without a mask or I shake the hand of a grocery store clerk, like nothing's going to happen to me today, right? And so you got to have that discipline to know that through the science, like, okay, we have to keep routinely, applying these beneficials. We have to do this, we have to do that, so that you reduce the overall risk. But yeah, it's a big topic. But yeah, good luck to anyone trying to do it. It's a lot of work.
Abhay, do you have any comments on pest management on vertical farming before we move on to the next section?
Absolutely. So sanitation, and yeah, I know people know a lot more about sanitation now in this past few months now, that yeah, wash your hands for 2 minutes now. I'm not talking about that. But yeah, sanitation, the reason for that is, as for vertical farming, there's, it's not as simple as I say, but there is just one door, one entry point, one exit point, so it can be a lot more manageable to control and sanitize everything that's going inside in the growing room. That's number one. And number two, the most important thing is scouting. As Rob mentioned, that you have to have your eyes open. People who are working there, and a lot of these farms would have dedicated personnel who are trained and who would be walking the crops and would look at the crops to identify if there are any pests or if there are any initial signs that tell them that there are any pests in there. So that scouting is very important, and the biologicals, the third one. So if you follow these steps, I think, I wouldn't say, because I always say insects are a lot more smarter than us human beings. I always keep on saying that. So yeah, we cannot just eliminate them totally, but at least we can have a really good check on them if you follow these three things.
That makes sense. Okay, great. Well, we are approaching the hour, so I want to conclude with our last section, which is talking about the future. And so, Rob, I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk about what's coming up for Farm.one in the future. And so let's talk about that.
Yeah, the future is obviously really hard to predict right now. So our current strategy is a mixture of what we were doing before, plus, a lot of these kind of new things that are emerging. But I would say overall, we love having local farms that grow really exciting specialty produce. And what we do kind of works really well in like global cities, which have great food scenes. And so New York is a really good example. We have a new project underway to build another farm in another city in the US, which we're hoping to be able to announce in a couple of months or so. As you might guess, some timelines have moved around a little bit, but that'll be our first farm outside of New York City. We're also working on a project in Asia for another Farm.one as well. And really, now our team is sort of devoted to running this operation in New York, looking for a larger space in New York so that we can, supply all these restaurants that will come back online, but also direct to consumer and more events, bigger and better ways to experience the farm. But also working with people on designing farms, building custom installations as well, and getting more of these small farms out there. And for us, that's a great opportunity to then, continue to kind of centralize the stuff that we do really well. So, all of the knowledge about the plants, the plant science, the education, the online content, all that kind of stuff. So if things go well, we should have, dozens of Farm.ones around the US and around the world within a couple of years, and have farms that are really close to the local community, that can be visited, that are transparent, and really kind of open up people's eyes to how amazing produce can be.
Great, thanks, Rob. And Abhay, do you want to conclude on what people should expect next from Fluence here?
Absolutely. So as I would go with what I always say, yeah, with Fluence, we can help the word grow smarter. And when I say smarter, not just in terms of our looks, but in terms of how we apply the technology, how we evolve the technology. Because I know at Fluence, we are having a lot more research is being done currently as we speak, not just on the lighting part, but also its applications on the plants, and how can we optimize the productivity with our lighting. So we are working towards that in order to grow smartly, and that's where we would like to engage with the growers and team up with them so that we all can make the world grow smarter.
Fantastic. And so before I hand this over to Jen, I did want to address the audience here. You guys have some fabulous questions that are coming in. We actually cannot answer even a fraction of them in this whole hour. And so 2 opportunities for you guys to keep in mind. So like Rob mentioned, if you follow Farm.one on their Instagram, they have a Wednesday Q&A session. And so a lot of your questions that are dedicated towards, Rob, where do you see the market going? Or where do we see or how are you applying certain techniques? Even after this webinar, go ahead and tune into their Instagram page and ask those questions directly to Farm.one, and they'll be able to answer those questions for you. And then again, for Fluence, we're also on social media and can answer a lot of these questions about lighting calculators and revenue per square foot for all of these different crops. There are a lot of really interesting questions and technical questions coming in. I just apologize that we're out of this hour. So I'm going to hand this over to Jen to conclude this session, and I want to thank you all for attending.
Hi, thank you so much, Elise, and thank you, Rob and Abhay. This was an incredible panel, and I hope you all found it informative. The recording will be available on Friday, and we will email you a link to share with your colleagues. If you'd like to learn more about Farm.one and Fluence, as Elise mentioned, you can check out our websites or the information here, specifically about Rob and Abhay, if you want to get in touch with them directly. In addition, Fluence's next webinar will be held on May 20th, and it will focus on cannabis vertical farming. There'll be a conversation between PIP Vertical Air Solutions and Fluence. You can register in the events section of our website. It'll probably be live in the next couple of days. Thank you for attending today's webinar, and have a great day.
Thanks, Jen. Bye.
Thank you.